welcome along to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ian Knight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we are talking about a case study, an example of where a development has gone wrong. Now, we're going to talk about a specific development that Andrew's been working on recently that has been causing a bit of a headache for him and some of the investors he's been working with. And I think that it's really important that when things do go wrong in property, that we talk about them openly, because people want to know about the problems. Because often, you'll hear stuff in the media and podcasts and you think property investment is so easy way to become a millionaire, just buy 10 houses or something like that. And of course we all know that it's not as easy as that. And you don't become a millionaire in 6 months or 12 months. There are risks, there are things that go wrong and go awry. And so in today, what we wanted to do is show you that it's not all easy or roses or daffodils all the time. So Andrew, why don't you just talk about this project, what the properties are, where they are, that kind of thing. And then we'll go through what's gone wrong and what you're doing to fix it.
Yeah, well, it's been responsible for these three grey hairs, you can see just here. I think... Look, this was a really interesting one because this came to us, this particular developer, we made contact with about 18 months ago, I think it was roughly. So about the end of middle to end of 2019. And the project was under construction. So actually, when something's, actually broken ground, your expectation is that completion is going to be quite a lot faster. And I think from memory, we were maybe up to early framing stages or something like that. Expectation was going to be finished at the start of this year, 2021, and price was good. So they were $649,000 for a 3-bedroom unit in Papakura in Auckland, and the rents were so strong that they were pretty much neutrally geared from day one. So we're pretty excited to have these on. The developer was a company called DDL, who have been around for a long while and have got a number of developments under their belt. I actually signed up for 2 of these myself. I signed up for a 3-bed and also a 4-bed because there was one 4-bed unit 16, so there's 16 units in total. And I believe the entire development was bought out by my investors. I ended up having to relinquish one of mine because one of my investors missed out on a property, so I gave them one of my 2 properties, and I ended up keeping the more expensive one, the 4-bed. And anyway, let's talk about what went wrong. So I think the first thing was that completion was pushed out massively. Now, there's been a whole world of reasons for that. So COVID has obviously been a major issue. Supply chain issues have affected this developer. I think my feel is that they maybe just bit off a bit more than they could chew. I think they had quite a lot of projects on the go at one time. And, as you grow as a development company, often, cash flow can become an issue because you've got to get something finished. And if that doesn't finish on time, you don't have the profits to go into the next project. And it has a snowball effect. And look, it would be fair to say in the earlier days, probably around about June this year, I was getting pretty annoyed and pushing them quite a lot, as were the investors that invested. You've got to take a bit of the good with the bad with the good because, yes, it's taking longer, but hey, the properties have gone up in value, so is it the end of the world? But one of the big things that concerned me was that maybe there'd be vulnerabilities in the contract and then the developers would use exit clauses like, say, a sunset clause or a price escalation clause or just something. And I really was just a bit nervous about that. The GM and I had some tense conversations probably in those earlier days, but to be fair, as we've got to the more recent months, he's been working a lot better with me at actually just getting this finished. And probably one of the other big issues is when a job is unfinished, it can be pretty messy. And so, for example, what I had to remind some of the investors that bought in here who are pretty proactive with going on site. Now, you can't just go on site because you don't own the house until it's complete. And the developer can have paint cans everywhere. They can have the whole place looking a shambles. It's not your house yet. It's their house until they sell it to you when it's complete. And so you do just have to remember this. And so what there were things on the site that concerned me. So when I got some negative feedback from a few investors, I actually sent up Kyle Brooklyn, who we've had on the show, to be my eyes and ears. So he flew to Auckland and inspected my unit and two other clients, so two other investors that I'd picked at random, just to go and have a look. And there were some terrible things. Like, for example, there was some scaffolding on the roof of one of the units. Now, if that had fallen down and hit a tenant on the head and killed them, that would have been a real problem. So there was this really difficult balance between, okay, well, the developer can do what they want at the moment, but also if there are builders on site so incompetent that they left a scaffolding panel on the roof, what have they left behind the walls? So, poor quality at some stages, and really pushed out that. I mean, we're almost 12 months that we've been delayed settlement.
And actually, it's quite interesting you mentioned Kyle Brooklyn, because he's very detailed as well. I got him to look at a property that I was looking at. He's like, no, you've got to take out the hot water cupboard, because actually that could be turned into a nice storage area. He's looking at the plans of these. So you should end up putting gas bottles on the outside if you can. So he had a whole heap of kind of ideas about ways to make it better for the tenant.
That's cool.
By changing it. So anyway, highly recommend having that chat. The other thing that I want to ask you though, Andrew, is before we talk about fixing the issues and how you go about resolving that, what I want to know, or what I imagine a lot of people listening to the show are thinking is, well, if there are so many issues, how was it that these properties were offered to investors if this sort of stuff went wrong? So what made you offer these to investors if, after going through the process, we're like, oh, there was some stuff that went wrong?
Look, I guess when a project is being built, again, you got to go back to the fact that a developer can do whatever they like on site, so long as what you're having handed over is finished at that stage. And we've got a whole risk assessment framework that we go through when we're electing to work with a developer or not. So we look at things like how many projects they've done in the past, how many projects they've got on the go at the moment, how they're funded, who the shareholders are. Do the shareholders have any niggly history? And just because there might be something doesn't necessarily mean we won't recommend their product. It just means it's something to be aware of. And what you've got to do is weigh up, okay, well, yeah, there's some things here that maybe is a risk, and then there's some positives here, and you've got to make a judgment call. This one actually had an interesting one. One of the directors of this company had some court case where they'd been taken to the employment court, something to restaurants or bars or something like that, and that came out through a couple of investors' due diligence. So that was something that we'd already looked at. Hey, is this actually something of significance when it comes to building a house? And we elected that no, not the case. So this developer was new to us, so I guess high risk from that side of things. But I guess the major positive was these properties were a great deal. And so we decided to go along with the process and, with all that knowledge. And what we have had now handed over, settlement was just last week, is something that's mostly finished. But we've got a plan to get that all finalised, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Well, let's dig into that now then. So what I want to know is how you solved the issue. So it sounds like you've settled the properties, even though they're not 100% finished. How does that work?
Cool. So Code of Compliance gets issued when the building has been signed off by the council. That doesn't necessarily mean all of it's completely perfect. And when you get handed over a brand new property, there's always what we call snags. So there might be something like a power socket that's not actually functional, but you don't know that until you plug in your hairdryer, in your case, Ed, and you notice that it's not working. And so some of those things come under the building defects period, so normally 12 months. Some of it is really, really important. So we had to make a judgment call of what things to put pressure on. So anything that was going to stop the property being tenanted, we applied huge amount of pressure to the developers to get it finished. And to their credit, they did. They got the vast majority of it. I'd say 95% of the work is done. Now, what I did was unfortunately, in the midst of all of this, Auckland goes into another lockdown. So we had to employ another building inspector. So I did that at my cost, went to the site, looked at all of the units. Now, Code of Compliance got issued. In his opinion, he thought the council probably maybe was a bit under pressure and didn't check it as thoroughly as he believes they should have done. So we actually had an on-site council visit on Friday last week, and our building inspector, who's independent, and the council and the developer went through and decided what was unacceptable. Now, for the next couple of weeks, our building inspector is going to be on-site making sure that all the work is being completed, even if it's just something like, fixing up a flashing or fixing up the landscaping, all those kind of things. So we've actually got someone there checking each of the units, and he's going through one at a time to make sure that they're perfect.
So my question, though, is if these have been settled by the investors, they've drawn down their mortgages and are now incurring interest costs, but do they have tenants in there? Are they earning rent if they've settled, even though there's still building work going on, or touch-ups, I should say, going on?
Nothing's going to stop a tenant living there. It might be a slight inconvenience. You might give a $100 a week discount or something like that. Maybe if you had, a unit which had actually a few niggly little things that were larger. But I think by and large, tenants are moving in, and it's not going to affect the rentability of them. They're just things that you want to have done.
And is the reason you pushed for settlement because the developer probably needed the money or wanted the money because it was so delayed, but at the same time, you didn't want to keep on pushing settlement until they could potentially trigger like a sunset clause? So you wanted to get it settled so that at least the investors could get that uptick in equity? Is that kind of where your mind was at?
The sunset clause definitely came into mind. As far as the developer needing their money, that's not my problem. But as far as them using something like a sunset clause to manoeuvre out, that not the sunset clause specifically, but that was a consideration for me. But actually what it came down to is unless the council reneged on their code of compliance, they took it back, then you're legally bound to settle. The code of compliance has been issued and the title's been issued. So as a purchaser, you have to settle, and you can't hold back funds unreasonably. So there is... as I said before, there's a completely reasonable expectation that there'll be stuff that needs to be fixed up post-settlement. And just because the developers here had taken a lot longer didn't mean that they had no intention of finishing them. I do think that we were the squeaky wheel in this case. I think we've probably had more service than if someone had gone to the developer directly. You're one person buying from them. We had the power of all of us, and the GM did say to me at one stage, I said to him, you're not going to do anything tricky like do this, and he said, oh look, to be fair, I think we've probably done dough on all these units because it's taken longer and the market's gone up so much, but we're very aware of how we'll be publicly flogged if we end up doing something like that. So we have the power of the podcast.
Well, let me ask you this: was the pain worth it? So I'm assuming that if you signed up to buy this, and I can't remember when these were bought, but they were was it lockdown or was it before lockdown? The first lockdown. It was
after lockdown. After lockdown. Yeah, after. It was kind of towards the end of that year. Look, absolutely. And actually, one of my good clients rang me the other day, and she said, "Oh, what if they don't finish it?" And I said, "Well, they will." But also, who cares? Because we've all made 200, 300 grand maybe on these units. And yes, it's on paper until you sell it. But let's say you made 200 grand. Let's say you had to finish those snags yourself because they went under. I'm not saying they're going to, but let's just say, worst case scenario that happened, they refused to finish it. Hey, might cost you 10 grand, 20 grand to get that stuff finished. Would you rather just have the extra 180? Of course you would. So that's where you've got to be a little bit sensible and not cut your nose off to spite your face. I've heard of investors getting all stroppy with these kind of things and pulling out of the contracts. No, buggy you. Look, yes, property investment can be relatively easy. It can also be challenging at times, but nothing good is easy all the time, and that's where you've just got to take a sensible approach and think about the economics. And I think in my video diaries that I sent out to all my investors that were investing in it, I said, hey, look, this has been a pain. More of a pain for me than anyone else, but it's worth it, and so that's why we've pushed so hard to get this done.
And I think the key message there as well is around settlement, is that the key thing that I'm thinking about with any of the builds I've got underway is making sure, or wanting to make sure, we get to the settlement point, because you only get the equity uplift if you settle the property.
Absolutely.
If the developer triggers the sunset clause or you pull out or whatever, any equity uplift in that property, you've lost it if you don't settle. You don't get it unless you actually buy the property. And so making sure that you're working with a developer who actually is going to settle and being able to settle at that lower price than what the current market market value is. That's what it's really about. Now, my main question, though, for you, though, Andrew, is if someone was kind of in this position, they're working with a developer directly, what should they be doing if they get into a situation like this in order to try and rectify it? Is it like what you're doing, trying to harass the general manager of the company until they pick up your phone call and rectify the situation? What sort of things could they do?
I think you do have to be the squeaky wheel, but you've got to also be sensible with your approach, because if you're just a pain in the butt to them, they will just ignore you. So you need to be the squeaky wheel without being a pain, and you also need to be reasonable. So, I've seen instances, again, where people have taken it too far with developers and they've been unreasonable, and then developers will use something like a sunset clause to exit a contract because they're just frustrated. In fact, I know one investor who wasn't one investor that worked with me, but he's working with one of my developers, and he was just being such a pain for this guy that he was like, look, I'll just give you your deposit back. Just go somewhere else. I don't want to deal with you anymore. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. And of course, the investor missed out on the capital growth because he was just not being reasonable in the process. So you've got to be reasonable. You have to be factual as well. So I really think getting an independent person is a wise thing to do, because again, if I go to site and say, hey, it's messy, and get upset about that, that's not necessarily going to get anything done. If I go and have someone with a licensed building, I get a licensed building practitioner to go or similar to go and have a look through things and say, hey, this isn't up to code and this is, then all of a sudden you've got facts.
And being able to pick up some of those key things, like you wouldn't jump on the roof normally, would you, Andrew, to check if there's any scaffolding up there? Whereas
not anymore. Not after I fell off my one in Auckland. But no, I think that like even Kyle, so he knew that he had these jobs. So then he turned up to Auckland and he thought, I can't see on the roofs. So he went down to Mitre 10 or something in an Uber and got a couple of poles and then attached them together and put his camera on the top. And no one else would have known that. But it was a serious thing. Like if that thing, there'd been some really bad winds in Auckland the week before. If they had fallen on someone's head, it would have killed them.
Yeah, and you're talking about, so they've left a single piece of scaffolding on the top of the roof, accidentally, and it could have fallen off. Yeah. God, that would have given you the fright of your life. That's terrible.
Oh, Kyle was really upset.
Well, let's wrap it up there, but I do think this is really important in terms of just, first of all, recognizing that not everything is always hunky-dory, but it's making sure that you fix it, and these kind of ideas about getting somebody independent who's actually a skilled builder, a licensed building practitioner, or a property inspector, something like that, in order to help you deal in facts. That is a very good point as well. But also not losing sight of the bigger picture if you have made significant equity gains. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you want to learn more about property with Andrew and I, check out our YouTube channel, because every Wednesday we release a brand new video at 10 a.m. to teach you something new about property investment. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ed McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And we're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.